I think this was a well-made film, and it ought to be for one of the most expensive movies that Disney has ever made. The action sequences were directed well, exciting and coherent. There was this very real sense of being in the midst of the action all the time, which worked for the 3D very well. The camera was always in the crux of the action. Slow-mo was used sparingly and effectively, the cinematography was sweeping without being sporadic, and managed excitement without resorting to shaky cam, grounding each sequence and making them easier to follow, but losing none of their energy or their unique iconic style. The acting was good and felt natural and in character, each actor bringing an extra dimension to their performances with body languages, expressions, and their way of speaking. I genuinely felt for the estrangement and reconciliation of Kevin and Sam Flynn. The music set the tone flawlessly. Each song was like incidental sounds created by machines or computers that just happened to form music, which actually tied into the plot of the film as well. And of course, Daft Punk always rocks. There are three major flaws with this film. For one thing, the narrative structure was inconsistent with its own internal logic. The distinction of the ISOs from regular programs was never adequately portrayed or explained, and there was no tie between the external and internal conflicts. The result of the narrative structure being inconsistent with its own internal logic leads us to a series of conundrums. Clue's primary motivation is Kevin Flynn's disc. Why does he hold a brief and meaningless audience with the son of his hated enemy before trying to personally kill him in an arena battle? When a MacGuffin is established, any efforts by the villain not to acquire it is confusing and lazy. There are long stretches of the main plot devoted to the discovery of the ISO programs, the systematic massacre of ISOs. There's an ISO main character, but despite all this, what an ISO is never fully explained, and also what is explained is usually disproven. Beyond their spontaneous generation, the two things that are supposed to make an ISO important and special is their free will and the ability for their bodies to be repaired. However, there doesn't seem to be a program in the grid that doesn't seem to have some version of free will, including characters like Zeus, who has an extemporaneous personality. Is he an ISO? And Kevin Flynn reprograms an enemy program, so the uniqueness of the ISOs is cast into doubt. This is the root cause of the problem for the character Cora herself. For lower screen time, she has very little impact on the plot, and serves mainly to fight and be Sam's love interest. Nothing more, and considerably less than what she could have been. Finally, there seems to be two major conflicts: Sam needing to find his estranged father, and the war with Clue. But despite the fact that these two elements could easily complement each other, they are kept apart. The war story unfolds separately with no direct connection to Sam's search or reconciliation with Kevin, which makes it feel fragmented and superfluous. The internal conflict of Sam's estrangement and its driving him to acts of rebellion and recklessness is underdeveloped and has little bearing on the plot. And although he incautiously goes against his father's wishes and gets Cora hurt, the damage is fixed with no lasting implications and moves the plot along, so there's no indication beyond Kevin's complaining that Sam did anything wrong. Kevin is nearly comatose with guilt throughout the first part of the film, but later he kills enemy programs and eventually Clue with little or no compunction. It all seems to come out of nowhere. Ironically, the most powerful internal conflict is that of Clue himself, who is struggling with what he's been asked to do, as well as his own clearly powerful feelings of abandonment and frustration. He even repeats the words of his maker verbatim in almost the same context, assuring his people he will not abandon them as he has been abandoned. In the end, however, there's no resolution for this either. He's told he did everything he was supposed to, but he got it all wrong, and then he dies in agony. The ultimate resolution for the film has no promise for any interesting continuation, has no echoes of the themes throughout, and feels ultimately unsatisfying, slow, and hollow. Fear not, these problems can be adjusted. For instance, the narrative structure is currently inconsistent. How to repair it? Have the characters take actions that flow naturally from their motivations and personalities. Since the ISOs have almost nothing to do with the plot, yet have the lion's share of exposition and long, boring scenes of dialogue, instead, have the exposition trimmed and tie the ISOs more firmly into the plot. Also, there is currently no ties between the internal and external conflicts. That's an easy fix. Have the internal and external conflicts be self-consistent and tie into each other. In a bit of poetic irony, the key to improving the story of Tron Legacy is Clue himself. Clue is a computer program, and he should take direct and emotionless advantage of any resources he has to hand. So, instead of Clue at the very beginning of the film telling Sam that he is not his father, he should have told him the exact opposite. Clue should tell Sam in his introductory scene that he is Kevin Flynn. The reason he appears younger is because of some kind of computer glitch, perhaps. And then, Clue should tell Sam the true story. This way, instead of having a boring dining room scene in which this exposition is delivered, Clue himself can give the real story, but reverse roles. Say that he is the one that kicked Clue out of his glorious grid, and that he needs Sam, his son, to hunt down Clue and retrieve his disc. This way, Clue has truly betrayed Sam's trust, and when he's later revealed to be a villain, he will be acknowledged as a cunning one. This would also put more suspense in the scenes where Sam finds his father in the wilderness, because the first time he meets him, for all he knows, and for all we, the audience, knows, this might be the dangerous renegade Clue. This could also give rise to a new and pervasive theme of abandonment and reconciliation. Although Clue is using Sam as a tool, he understands what it is to be abandoned, and he doesn't like the feeling. So he might actually try in his mind and his actions to represent the father that Kevin Flynn is not. Kevin Flynn has abandoned both of them. And although Clue is a ruthless tyrant, he might still be interested in proving to himself and to Sam that he's a better Kevin Flynn than the one that is real. Also, he could parallel Sam. Sam has these same sort of rebellious tendencies that Clue has as this abandoned child. This could also tie nicely into the ISO idea if Clue himself was an ISO. This would explain his hatred of the species as this sort of unconnected and unassociated program. Clue discovered that he had free will, and he used that free will to challenge his maker. Speaking of ISOs, they could tie in nicely into this plot much better as well. Consider, if ISOs are the only programs that are capable of going into the real world, our world, this would explain the games as well. It was training the ISOs for battle in the real world. On the subject of ISOs, Cora could also be made more interesting and more relevant to the plot if she was made into Zeus's daughter. Not only would this be amusing and surprising, destroying the preconception of what Zeus appears to be, but it would also be an indication of another thing that makes ISOs special: their ability to reproduce. This would also go to some lengths to explain why Zeus even listens to their requests. Zeus could feel true remorse for his betrayal of his flesh and blood, or silicon and circuits, and his death perhaps could even be a selfless act of atonement, another indication of what separates ISOs from regular programs. And finally, the ending. Let's tie it into the theme of reconciled fathers and their children by having Kevin and Clue recombine into one entity, rather than just destroying both in a big explosion of meaninglessness. Let's have them both be a singular entity but unable to leave the grid, which is fitting punishment for a person who left the real world so often to visit his fantasies. Now he has to live there and fix the world that he essentially destroyed. Also, by leaving Kevin and Clue alive in one person, it would create more opportunities for sequels because we'd actually know characters inside of the grid. Thank you for watching our first review. I might take requests if you have any stories you think could use the benefit of a creative consultant, and I hope to see you in another review later on.